Hello and welcome to Europa Universalis 4. I am Lord Forwind, here with a quick guide on how to play as a minor nation in the HRE. Now when I say minor nation, just to be clear, I don't mean minor nations. Nations, I mean, that are smaller than those like Saxony and Brandenburg. I think I'll even include Pomerania in that because it's a rather large nation. No, I'm talking about these nations right here, everywhere from Friesland all the way south to Augsburg. For this example, of course, I picked, of all nations, Hesse because they're right in the middle. So to play in the HRE is very difficult. In fact, out of all the areas in Europa, I have to say, outside of the HRE, probably some of the other better regions are Arabia, region up here near Georgia, the Inca, and the Aztec. And some parts of India and Indochina in terms of being actually the way, what you're looking for in one of these games. You're looking for a struggle to survive with lots of little neighbors to conquer that doesn't involve, you know, major half-continent-sized wars by the 1500s, which you get if, you know, you're Muscovy or Poland, any of the major powers. You tend to end up in some major wars. So the HRE is a lot of struggle to survive early on, and it's important to recognize one problem with playing the HRE. Normally when you start off you want to conquer as much land as possible. Well, that works if you're in a rich area of the game. If you're in like France, even some in Russia, or Italy, or any of the nations that have good development. The problem is Northern HRE is pretty terrible on the development. True, they have a couple 10 development provinces, but outside of a couple capitals or major, you know, free city states like Hamburg, Frankfurt, Lubeck, Bremen, a couple of those, Nuremberg, the development in the HRE is rather on the low side, and to make things even worse, it's all woods, which means developing it is very difficult, which means if you're going to expand in the HRE, it's important to note that the AIs will develop land slowly over time, and thus expanding in the HRE, if you want a lot of development, should take a while. You shouldn't just go on a rapid conquest of all of northern Germany. I've done it before. You can do it. It's fun. It's very difficult, but you're left with a lot of relatively bad provinces scattered around that is not worth your really time to develop. By comparison, so one of the provinces Hesse starts with, Kassel here, is 6 development. Let's just take a random French province here. This province here is twice the development of that. If we go up to some of these, 17, 3 times almost. Outside of, you know, the farmland provinces in the HRE, which even the farmland provinces are 12, but at least you can develop them. The rest of the HRE land is, you can own 2 provinces outside of the HRE for the development of 1. Not to mention, since you are in the HRE, you have to contend with the Emperor, who is of course going to go around slapping unlawful territory on you and causing lots of autonomy issues. There are some benefits to playing in the HRE. For example, most of the HRE is of the same Germanic culture, which does make things a little easier. You have a very large accepted cultural range compared to, you know, like the English. The French are large, obviously the Castilians are large too, but in terms of actual, you know, culture spread, the HRE might be the largest individual culture outside of the Russian ones, which, considering their provinces are larger, I don't know what the actual ratio is. Although you do get a lot with these Bedouins, Tunisians areas. But it does mean inside the HRE, what land you grab, you're not going to have tons of cultural penalties to expand out of it. On the other hand, the Emperor is fun to deal with. So the Emperor starts out as Austria and will usually be Austria or other major nations. In fact, Hesse is one of the few small nations that has a chance of ending up as Emperor, mainly due to their free +1 diplomatic reputation. But I digress. So you've got your 8 reforms? I've actually never bothered to count them. 8 reforms of the HRE. You can only pass them if you're Emperor, but you can support passing them if you're not Emperor. Obviously, they are an entirely different thing, but The Emperor gets different benefits as compared to the members. As you go further up the tree, the Emperor takes more control until you hit Proclaim Eberkaisertum. Well, I said it wrong. Apologies to the Germans. But it means there's no elective monarchy, and the electors here, 7 electors, don't actually elect the next leader. It just stays in that kingdom, which usually if you've hit that point, actually usually if you've hit this Uyghur Landsfried, you're on the path to be passing the final reform of the HRE, which unites all of the HRE under you. Now it's important to note, and I'll just throw this out here, if you do manage to get all the way down to revoke the privilege, all the members of the HRE that are nominally friendly towards you will become your vassal, which allows for vassal spam wars, where you essentially, usually you do as Austria, is you declare war on a country like, I don't know, Russia when it's formed, and watch as every single HRE country here all sends 4 or 5 troops all the way to Russia that total up to about 500 units. It's one of the easier ways actually to beat the Ottomans or Russia late game. It's ridiculously powerful. And the best part is they have no liberty desire. So, becoming emperor, obviously you have to get the support of a majority of the electors. Usually 3 is enough. Usually Bohemia goes off and just wants himself to be emperor. Luckily, Austria is not an elector at this point in time, 1444. So they tend to need the support of the electors, which means you can easily poach electors off of them. Some ones that tend to be pretty good allies, that in the sense that they are not terribly ambitious. Mainz is a good one. It's a 1-province theocracy here. Cologne and Trier, if they're not rivals, tend to be pretty good too. All those 3 are religious orders, so they will stay Catholic as long as possible once the Reformation hits. But also they don't have all the trouble with dynasties and royal marriages left and right. Plus they field, 5-6 troops each. So. But one way to deal with the emperor and all the electors in the HRE is, first of all, be one. Obviously be one of the starting electors, or at a different bookmark, take those electors. But if you conquer a province in the HRE, the emperor has the option of declaring, return unlawful territory. You can refuse, then there's a chance the emperor can attack you, but I've usually found they don't unless you're really weak or they're really strong. So Austria, in a union with Hungary, might declare war on you. If you're Lüneburg here, you take Lautenburg here, and you have no allies, they'll probably declare war and kill you. But if you're allied to, Bohemia, Saxony, or even Austria themselves, the odds are they won't attack you. The other thing is, if you conquer land and you're allied to the emperor, there is a chance they don't slap you with unlawful territory. Also, if you go after their rivals, even if you're not allied to them, the odds of them slapping you with unlawful territory is significantly lower, I believe. So being allied to the emperor is a good thing, and luckily at the exact beginning of the game is important. Almost every nation in the HRE that's a monarchy can get a royal marriage with Austria. If you can do it, do it. It means Austria won't just randomly attack you because they'll lose 1 stability, but it also gives you a shot at getting an alliance with them, which if you're a minor nation is slim, but it's doable if you improve relations, get diplomatic reputation, and Austria doesn't end up with like 7 alliances, which sometimes they do. It generally just protects you. Whoever the emperor is, you want to be on usually good terms with them until the Protestant Reformation happens and the religious leagues form. At which point, if you're going Protestant or Reformed and you think, you're going to survive and win the League War, by all means, defend the emperor and throw in your lot with the Protestant Reformed and, of course, the Anglicans over in England, if that actually happens. But in terms of actual expansion, which is probably why you came to this video, the trick to expanding in the HRE, as I said earlier, is to do it slowly. This means taking like 1 to 2 provinces in a war. It's really tempting to declare war on a province like, Brunswick. Beat them in, 3 provinces. Oh, I really want that land. Well, anywhere else in the world, you could do it. If you're France, you can take 3 English provinces and usually not have to deal with a coalition. Or if you're the Ottomans, you can take half of the Mamluks and not really worry about the coalition. Or if you're Muscovy, you take half of Novgorod and don't have to worry about a coalition. Not so much in the HRE. So when you expand, and this is getting into aggressive expansion a little bit, when you expand, there is modifiers to the penalty of the land you're taking. The value of the province obviously matters. If you take a 5 development province as compared to a 11 development province, it's not twice. There are better videos out there that can explain this better. But this is just a quick summary. You have a much larger penalty if you take it, mainly because of the war score province cost. This is 19, this is 9. I believe that might actually be the percent the aggressive expansion goes up, but I could be wrong. But then you have modifiers that are added to it and increase based off multiple factors. First one is culture group. So if you're in, let's jump over here to the Saxon group. Say you're Saxony and you take land from Brandenburg. Okay, so you get to defend everybody around you. However, people within the culture group are going to get a larger penalty. And then if I remember correctly, people within the accepted culture group, which is all of these lit ones, will also receive a bonus to that penalty. Then you get a penalty added on for religious group. It's why when the Ottomans, are conquering the entire Middle East, Europe really doesn't care. Or when Russia's conquering, Orthodox or Muslim lands, the Catholics don't care. So fighting Catholics as Catholics, you get a penalty. It's also why when the Ottomans invade Europe, they don't tend to get too far because coalitions against them tend to form because of the very large different religion penalty. But there is a penalty within your own religion. It's just minor. So you're not going to see that as a big factor until you hit Protestantism, Reformed faith, and the Anglican faith. Then you'll start to see real aggressive expansion penalties. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Now, there is one other major penalty which only applies to the HRE, and it's a penalty for expanding within the HRE. You get a larger expansion penalty for expanding within the HRE with all other HRE members. It means if you're France and you take one province in the HRE, you're going to have a much larger penalty than, say, you were Burgundy and took one province in the HRE. Stuff like that. So it prevents you from going on massive conquest sprees within the HRE. In fact, a better way of expanding in the HRE, I've found, is to vassalize people, if you can get away with it. The odds are you won't be able to peacefully vassalize them because they have this wonderful little penalty if you look at the bottom of the reds. Brunswick is a member of the Empire, -25. It makes it almost impossible to vassalize peacefully within the HRE, unless you play as Austria, Saxony, or Hesse. And even then, it's difficult. Really, you have to go and you have to grab both diplomatic ideas and influence ideas, and then have a diplomatic diplomatic reputation advisor, approve relations, and even then, you have to be a massive, powerful nation. Like, you have to control like 2/3 of the HRE for a single one province like Unsbach. It's very difficult. The odds are you're not going to be able to do it. Of course, the HRE is the largest collection of Catholic nations, so the odds of actually getting, a diplomatic inheritance of the land is a lot better. Specifically, you can do it pretty easily with Bohemia until Potebrand kicks out your dynasty. So if you're good at playing royal marriages and union games, HRE is your perfect area. Otherwise, you have to kind of eat your way through the HRE very, very slowly. For example, if you were to attack Brunswick here, pretty much you would only want to take one province from this province. You wouldn't be able to take the other ones. The penalty would grow too large. Maybe you could get away with 2 provinces, but when you're this small, taking 3 provinces is nigh on impossible without a huge coalition forming against you. And I'm talking huge. I'm talking like 12 nations being the starting size for a coalition in the HRE. It's not unusual to see it as like 30 nations. If you expand to like 4 provinces, you could get almost all 58 of the princes after you. It's quite devastating. It's one reason the HRE, despite being relatively divided, hangs on in some shape or form till the end of the game, unless somebody from outside conquers it, which, is realistically going to be, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, one of those. France, England if they've conquered France. Burgundy if they've conquered France. Poland, Lithuania if they've conquered Russia. Russia if they've conquered Poland, Lithuania. Or the Ottomans if they've conquered Hungary and Poland. And the AI is ridiculously bad at it. I've never actually seen the AI get rid of the HRE, because in order to do that, you have to control the emperor and all the electorates. You don't actually have to own their provinces, you just have to control their capital, which means if you do a huge invasion war, you could technically do it, but you can even dismantle it from within the HRE, but it's really hard. So in terms of expansion, as I said, minor nation, slow expansion. Now, if you're going areas to focus on expanding into, this is just a rough guide. If you're playing, let's say, in this area of the HRE, so everywhere from Cleves, Cologne, Brunswick, north, but not including Mecklenburg, so this area. Your best bet is honestly trying to get to the coast. It sounds really stupid, but the coast provinces here are grasslands. Specifically, oddly enough, East Frisia is not in the HRE, which means you can conquer them pretty easily without a huge penalty if you're someone like Munster, Oldenburg, or Friesland. Also, if you're interested in fun, the HRE has lots of government types, the most in the world in some sense. You've got administrative republics, you've got oligarchic republics, you've got free cities, you've got theocracies, you've got merchant republics, you've even got the one peasants republic, and then of course you have all your monarchies, etc. Which means playing as Friesland, you can have a nice, pretty powerful republic. In fact, Dithmarschen up here is a really powerful nation. If you're looking to conquer lots of land, they do get a free +10 morale of armies and a negative 10% shock damage, which makes them a pretty good nation to expand in the HRE if you're looking for lots of conquest. So if you're in the area, try to go for the coastland. Munster's lands here looks really tempting, but again, highest development province is 10, the rest is lower. By the 1600s, most of the HRE provinces will be like 12, 13 development, roughly. It depends. They tend to, depending on how many countries are conquered, individual nations will slowly improve their development if they get the chance to, or if it becomes worthwhile. Don't expect to see Dithmarschen up here with a marsh do much improvement. But somewhere like Bremen with farmlands, they're going to develop that province over time. Of course, it starts out high development anyway. Other things to look out for are these wonderful little free city governments. They're really tempting to conquer. Don't. Just don't. Free cities are high development provinces with a bonus to more developed trade efficiency, and they've got a pretty strong republic. The issue with them, and I'll show you, is if one goes to declare war on someone like Frankfurt, oops, I gotta wait a little while here. I'll just whiz it through to the next month. Yada yada yada, I know that. All of that, blah 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 blah. Moving forward, the free cities are protected. Now there's no guarantee button, but if you look over here, they're allied with those guys, whatever. They're a free city in the empire, and Austria will protect them. Austria is the emperor. Austria has allies. If you attack a free city, the emperor usually, I don't know if it's this case because I don't actually have a claim on the land, but can usually call their allies to war with you, which means you're going to be facing, you know, since Austria is usually emperor, 7 or 8 other nations on top of Austria. You're not going to succeed in doing it. Now, that was this area. If you're going to expand over in this region, not counting Brandenburg and Pomerania, because those are moderately large nations that tend to form Prussia, so they are in a separate video. Well, Brandenburg is, Prussia is almost the same thing. But if you're in this area, the thing to watch out for is, of course, your free cities. Really, you've got to watch out for Bremen and Hamburg. Now, the other thing to note is Lubeck is a merchant republic, so they will be forming trade leagues with everybody. If you look at their diplomatic relations, most of the one-city provinces in the northern HRE here fall under their control, fall under Venice's control, or Genoa's control. Obviously, they haven't built up their full trade league yet. But this is the Hanseatic League, these countries here. So it's important to note that trying to actually conquer them is going to be very difficult. You can do it with the power of like Bohemia and Austria behind you, but otherwise it's rather difficult, which means the best thing to do is honestly leave them alone. Late game you can get a lot of money from them, since free cities tend to have a lot of money. Obviously that was nerfed in one of the more recent patches to reduce it, but you can still get a fair amount of money from them. Also, with the new mechanic of steering trade, they can be a good way of dominating trade nodes because they have huge bonuses to trade. In fact, most of them, most of the free cities honestly exist on a center of trade or near one. It's just, that's why they're free cities. They were rich in trade. I won't get into how they formed. Suffice to say, it was merchants fighting Vikings. It's really kind of cool, but why Prussia and northern Germany dominates Germany today to a large degree. So if you're going to expand, you want to try and work your way down here into the real heart of the HRE, which is right through here, ignoring Saxony. These are the lands you can legitimately try and conquer, right through here in the northern HRE. The Hesse is at the southern part of that, flowing into the bottom part of the HRE. In the bottom part of the HRE, you've got these lands here. Important to note, Lorraine belongs to Provence, who's allied to France, so they're safe for a while. But going from Alliance here over to Bavaria, you've got another group of them that can be conquered. But of course, there's four free cities, 3 right here, 1 up here. That makes expansion into this area rather difficult. Therefore, the actual nations one can conquer down here are pretty limited. Bavaria looks really large and can be very powerful in the hands of a human. But in the hands of an AI, their land is kind of rich for the taking. So if you're one of these countries here, you just ally yourself to Bohemia or Austria, and usually you can crush Bavaria. The nice thing about conquering Bavaria is Bavaria has a lot of farmland. In fact, all but one of their provinces is farmland, which means conquering it's valuable. And more importantly, it's poorly developed farmland, which means you can develop it up at a fraction of the cost of developing these northern wooded provinces. Because that's a 15% penalty from the get-go to develop this land. So take 1 or 2 provinces, wait till later on to conquer the rest once the AIs do some development, and also wait until you get bonuses towards development. A lot of the northern HREs, I know Saxony has one, Brandenburg has some, obviously Hesse does, I think Brunswick does too. They have a cheaper development cost idea, which is really awesome. The other thing that it's probably worth doing is going down the economic tree. You usually want to take the economic tree anyway in the game because it supplies the most money outside of the trade idea. But it's the 20% development cost finisher that's really strong. It makes developing this land, 20% cheaper, which almost gets rid of the cost of the woods. So it's still never going to be as developed as highly as France could be if you just stick in France and develop farmland, but it's still pretty good. Another thing to note before I forget is passing the call for Reich reform here. It does give you 5% cheaper development costs for both the Emperor and the Member. After this point, the Emperor starts to get a larger benefit from every reform passed. But even if you're not trying to be Emperor and pass all the reforms, passing the first reform just benefits everyone in the HRE. It's worth doing and supporting if you can do so. Other thing to realize about the HRE is your alliances are everything. As I said, you want an alliance with one of the larger nations. Austria, Bohemia, Poland usually will be friendly with the HRE. Don't expect Burgundy, France, or England to care though. But Saxony's not really a large nation. It's really Bohemia and Austria. If Brandenburg conquers Pomerania and the Teutonic Order and gets close to forming Prussia, yeah, they're a great power. Saxony tends to survive for a while because they tend to be allied to one of the larger nations. But it's actually, despite all the land to conquer, you have to really go through and take out all of the free cities. And suddenly there's a lot less nations to conquer in the HRE. But it's rather fun. I find the best time for expansion is starting in 1444, running to Protestant Reformation. Then there's a handful of years around then where if you convert to Protestantism or Reformed, you're going to have an easier time conquering with the HRE. I mean, the whole alliance network of the HRE will be all messed up as nations that were allied suddenly find themselves on the opposites of the Protestants and Catholics. Then, of course, you have the biggest game-changing event in the entire game, the religious war, the religious league technically, but I call it the religious war because that's the actual war, where the Protestants and the Reforms and the Anglicans, if they form, are against usually the Catholics and their allies. Of course, there's rivalries and you can have Catholics and Protestants on either side, but suffice to say, it tends to destroy any alliance network in the HRE. And if you're Protestant and your side is winning, obviously you prefer to be leading the Protestant side, or leading the Catholics if you stay Catholic, which usually, if you're leading the Catholics, you have to be emperor. So, just throwing that out there. You can tend to snag some land from that war, but more importantly, you can break alliances and countries apart. If you're emperor, you tend to want to keep the HRE as broken apart as possible, but if you're not the emperor, you want to consolidate as much land as you can while not getting a coalition declared against you. So, and to summarize, conquer a couple provinces at a time. Don't go on any mass conquering sprees. Wait till the aggressive expansion ticks down. It's safe to refuse the emperor to return land if you're feeling that the emperor won't just declare war on you. Better relations help, royal marriages help, alliances make you pretty much totally safe. Obviously, try to be friends with the emperor or allied to them. They won't join you in your conquest in the HRE, but they can protect you against other would-be conquerors and coalitions. Bohemia is your best ally in the HRE, unless they become emperor, and then in that case, Austria is your best friend in the HRE. Use them very well. Obviously, you need 10 favors to fight wars. If you've got 5 or 6 allies, you can usually beat someone who has 3 or 4 allies. You're going to probably end up going over your diplomatic relation slots. That's not a huge issue. Just be aware it can get out of control. Vassalization can take whole countries a lot easier than actually conquering them. Of course, once you annex them, there's a huge penalty for annexing an HRE country. I think it's 25 relations with all other HRE members or something. Plus, you lose diplomatic reputation as well. So avoid that if you're trying to be emperor. Let's see, what else? Oh yes, don't fall behind in military tech. The HRE is really awful at wiping out armies. You want to have the best army possible. In fact, going the entire game with a focus on military power is not the worst thing in the HRE, unless of course you get miles ahead at military tech. But in that case, you can spend that excess monarch points on developing your lands. Make sure, of course, that if you do develop lands, you use the Encourage Development Edict if you can to save monarch power. Overall, you tend to build a lot taller in the HRE than you do outside of it, other than maybe Italy. Just because of how difficult it is to consolidate power in the HRE. The HRE tends to really get into conquest wars in like the 16th and 1700s. Once Absolution comes into it, the HRE goes nuts because you have the nationalism casus belli on all people of your culture group, which is large no matter where you are in the HRE. At the smallest is the Franconians right here, but everywhere else you've got huge amounts of claims and conquest. You get imperialism. That's really when you can conquer the HRE. Now, there are a couple minor things I'm just going to throw out here. If you come to see how to survive as the HRE nations, you can leave. But if you want to form Germany, these are the countries you need to own. Conquering them is a real struggle. To point out, you have, let's see, 3 free cities, capital of Brandenburg, which can form Prussia, Saxony, who has tons of allies. You have to conquer all the way from Hamburg in the north, all the way to Alas over here, all the way up to Cologne. It's really difficult to do. But if you do, you get to form Germany about 100, what is it, like 100? Almost 100 years ahead of time, a little bit less. Which is kind of awesome. You don't get new ideas for that, which is a shame. But if you're not emperor, if you are emperor, you actually break out of the emperor empire and form your own country, which destroys the HRE, but at that point you can probably dissolve the HRE or decide to go straight for forming the HRE as a country. The HRE as a country, by the way, doesn't have unique ideas either. So there's also the formable nation of Westphalia, which is, I think it came about due to Napoleon, but essentially these are the provinces you have to own. There's not that many. There just happen to be scattered. One is in Magdeburg, which is usually a trade league, and then the rest are, you know, they take their own work to conquer as well. There's only 5 or so of them. You do get a claim on the area, you have to move your capital in there, but it's important, you can only form it if you're not in the HRE or as an elector, which means all these countries up here, outside of Cologne, there are no electors up here, which makes it difficult. So unless you're given an electorship, the odds of you being able to form it are slim to none. Really, it's difficult. Now, you can't even form it as emperor, I don't believe, which is a little bit stupid. Other than that, the HRE is, of course, the center of the Protestant Reformation and all that. So at some point you have to deal with that, but it's not too hard because you tend to be tiny countries. You can usually suppress religious revolts if you want to stay Catholic, or easily convert Protestant if you want to. Other than that, there are quite a few achievements for the nations. Hesse, in particular, has Hessian mercenaries, have 50 mercenary regiments and no loans, which is fun to try and do because Hesse actually is one of the harder nations in the HRE. You're surrounded by lots of people. You have no really strong allies or power base to build from. It's a real test of survival. If you want really hard, Nassau over here is particularly difficult. But that's pretty much it for this video. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll leave them there. I'm not going to go into ideas and stuff because this is not a specific country guide. It varies. Obviously, there's lots of different idea groups, so check those out before you pick your nation. I have a Saxony video. I have an Austria video. I have a Brandenburg into Prussia video. This is for most of the other HREs. I don't think I have a Bohemia video yet. So if people want a guide to how to play Bohemia, ask me about that and I will do that. Other than that, that is the HRE, and this is a not so short guide in the end of how to play as a minor nation in the HRE. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, subscribe, like, comment, hit the notification button, and I'll see you guys all in another video. Bye for now.